Thanks for joining us for a special edition of the City Manager's Report. I'm Andy Radig, and I'm joined by Oshkosh City Manager Mark Rohloff. In today's program, we'll examine the proposed 2023 City of Oshkosh budget. There are a lot of pieces to this puzzle, so let's sort it out. And Mark, thanks for being here today.
Great to be here, Andy.
All right, well, let's start with some basics. Everyone wants to know how next year's city budget will affect them. And what are we looking at for this next budget?
The purpose of this program is really to get the public aware of what's going on in advance of public hearing on November 2nd. We certainly value public input. And before the public provides input, having a little overview of things and what you may or may not like about the budget, you want to tell the council about. So that's going to be scheduled for November 2nd. So in advance, I just wanted to give a general overview of the city budget. And even though our overall budget, everything is $140 million on an annual basis, plus another $60 million in our capital improvement program, pretty much the general focus for the taxpayers is on the general fund and the levy impact, because that's what they're going to be paying when they get the property tax bill in December. So we're going to focus on that today.
Okay, and we're looking at some of those tax levy impacts and some of the changes from last year.
Right, so we want to cut to the chase. So as proposed, the levy increase is an increase of 4.19%. That's how much we collect. So that's a little over $1.8 million more than last year. So we try to break it down. For a $150,000 home, that's assessed value, the increase is about $69 for a year. The tax rate, which people may or may not be aware of, that's per $1,000 of assessed value, is $12.07, and that's proposed at a 46-cent per thousand increase. So that's the general overview of what the proposed budget is on, impact is on your property tax bill.
Mm-hmm. And just to clarify, this is for the city portion of that tax bill.
Exactly. So there's there's a lot of other portions, but this is just the city. Doesn't include other governmental entities that we'll talk about later.
Okay. All right. Very good. Okay. Then one of those areas, I know that the general fund of the city budget is one of the largest pieces of the puzzle, so to speak. Can you tell us a little bit more about where we stand with that?
Yeah, even though the levy's going up 4.19%, our general fund budget is only going up 3.41% over 2022. And there's a variety of reasons for that, but I want to focus on two large areas. But you can see that the expenditures, public safety is a huge part of our general fund. It's 60%. Then there's other elements to that. Public works, general government, all those other things. But you can see public safety takes the lion's share. So when we're talking about the increases in the general fund, it's important to see that. Public safety, a lot of people don't realize it, public safety, police and fire, 90 to 95% of their entire budget is all personnel. So the increase you see is really just taking care of cost of living and things like that. Another big component for everybody, not just public safety, is health insurance, and we're looking at a 16% increase in health insurance. So these are two of the big increases, but our general fund is proposed to go up $1.7 million. These are already over $2 million, so you can see that these are two of the biggest parts. But when you think about fuel that's going up, and we've all experienced that, and just general inflation as well as raises and wage adjustments for other employees, not public safety, you can see that it adds up really fast. So, but these are some of the highlights in terms of increases in our budget.
Okay, and we've been talking here the general fund, but the levy allocation deals with the whole piece of the pie, the whole pie.
There's a lot more than just the general fund, because we have some special funds that do get some outside revenues, but they still need to get subsidized by the tax levy. So you can see the general fund takes up the lion's share of the levy. The next biggest part is our debt service fund. All of the capital projects we do, we borrow for most of our capital projects. So that's at 29%. That's a pretty sizable amount. So when you ask about it, all the street projects that we're currently doing, go on we borrow for those, and then they go on the levy. And then you can see there's a lot of different other funds and different programs that we fund with the tax levy. But I thought a better graphic would be just to break it down and just say, where does this go? If you take a property tax bill, just the city portion, for a $150,000 house, you can see where this goes. And, there's a lot of things you pay on a monthly basis that may cost, a little more or a little less than $150 a month. But look what you get for city services. Now, clearly the lion's share goes to debt service. Again, I said about 29% of the bill, but you can see police and fire are another big part of that. That's equal to debt service. And then public works, things that aren't covered by other revenues. The library is largely tax funded, but you can see all the other services that are in there that you pay for. So when you think about $150 a month and what you can buy with $150, I think you get a pretty good value for what you're paying for to the city of Oshkosh. And I certainly don't want to shy away from that because it is that much, but I think it's a good value.
And it's understandable. Most folks have a home mortgage, and so that's debt service on a personal home level, and that's the same as the city. That's a big portion of it.
Yeah, and the investment we do, it does provide long-term benefit. And also one of the reasons we borrow and have that debt service is so that future generations, if you sell your house next year, then the person who bought your house is paying the taxes, paying the debt service on the streets that are also benefiting them. So putting that into debt service just seems to be a fair way to allocate the costs of our capital projects as well.
And a lot of those things were refinanced at lower rates, too.
Yes, we've taken advantage of that, and actually one of the increases in debt service this year is we did some advanced borrowing for 2023 projects because we knew and saw that the rates were going up.
Okay, all right. Very eye-opening on what those monthly city costs are and how that breaks down. So
one other thing I want to point out with expenditures is there are no staff increases proposed in the base general fund budget. Everything you just saw doesn't have any increases in staff. There are staffing proposals that council is going to be considering. We refer to those as budget enhancements. Those are going to be separately considered by council, and I can talk about that a little later as well.
Okay, very good. And we also wanted to remind folks that these budget documents and more information, if you'd like to take a deep dive on all the facts and figures, that information is available on the city's website, and you can look it up under the budget and financials area and get some more information there. So, we've been talking about some of the expenditures and that area, but on the other side of it, we have the revenues that are coming into the city, and so we have some general fund revenues as part of that.
And this is a good way also to understand how the property tax fits in, because the property tax is pretty much the main revenue that we have control over. So you can see that the tax levy is about 45% of our general fund. A lot of folks don't realize we don't get direct sales tax or income tax. That is all paid to the state, and then they allocate it back to us in various forms, including gas tax that you pay at the pump. So you see intergovernmental revenues is less than a third. It used to be much more, but the state's been taking more. And then the other one I would point out is I often hear criticism that I just don't agree with, that we rely too much on fees. And you can see that our fees for the general fund are about 1/12 of the entire general fund budget. So while you may individually pay a fee, it's not really a huge part of our general fund. We carefully review our fees, but we can't charge more than the cost of providing the service in the first place. So our fees are relatively minor given the services that you pay for when you do pay a fee. Okay, and a large portion of that pie chart is intergovernmental revenues. And, if you could tell us a little bit of background about the history of how the state does revenue sharing with municipalities. Well, I've been talking about this at the state level as well. I've been talking to different groups. And the graphic I want to show you is really on a state level, but this easily applies to Oshkosh. In fact, it almost mirrors. But I think I just want to show people that if you take a look at revenues, shared revenue program, which is how the state redistributes funds back to municipalities, that's the blue line there. And you can see it's been flat or gone down over the last 15 years. And actually, if I did a 30-year view of this, it'd be exactly the same. There haven't been increases. There have been decreases. Meanwhile, the other revenues you see there, particularly the income tax, which is in the orange, and the yellow, which is the sales tax, over that 15-year period here, they've gone up 50%, 5-0, and the state continues to reduce or freeze our revenues. That's hardly sharing, and it's a concern that we all throughout the state have to address. The system of funding local governments, the state-local relationship is broken, needs to get fixed. And when you think about that, 100 years ago, when the income tax was instituted, 80% was supposed to be going to local governments. It's not even close to that today. So I'm going to get off my stump, Andy, but just let people know that you need to let your legislators know that local governments need to get funded. That's public safety. All those things you saw, they need to get funded, and we need to have the discussion to fix this and help us move forward to keep us relying on property taxes. We're over-reliant on property taxes, and that needs to end.
Okay. It's an important aspect to be aware of for sure. So, we've talked a little bit about different aspects of the budget. You mentioned briefly that there's some budget enhancements that are being proposed to council, and if you can just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. This is something that the council, as the elected officials of the community, struggle with, and they asked staff, me and our finance folks, to limit the increase in the levy to 4%, and we proposed 4.19. So it actually exceeds what the council directed. They understand why, because of all the costs that I identified earlier. But there are still many needs and even mandates that we have to address, and staff made several budget enhancement requests. When we added them all up, there were about 20 of them. So council is going to review those, but they're struggling with how do we add these things to the budget without increasing the tax rate. And they're very concerned about that, and I think that's legitimate. And so this is the list that we're providing to the council. This is under hot topics. It lists all of the budget enhancements that staff has asked for, but these are not into the budget just yet. So council's going to be listening to public input at the hearing and then making a decision on November 9th when the budget finally gets approved.
Okay, very good. As Mark mentioned, that is under Hot Topics on the front page of the City of Oshkosh website, if you'd like to take a look at it. Okay, taking a step backwards, Mark, the overall thought behind developing a budget is it needs to be in alignment with what the overall plan is for the city. Can you speak to that? Yeah,
our strategic plan, we've been working on a strategic plan every 2 years for the last 12 years. And the council is very committed to the strategic plan. And you'll hear a lot of talk these days about priority-based budgeting. We effectively do priority-based budgeting by adopting a strategic plan and sticking to it. So you see the 6 goals of our strategic plan: quality of life, public safety, infrastructure, strengthening neighborhoods, economic development, and effectiveness of government. I can tell you that throughout the budget, you'll see these priority goals weaved into the budget. I've highlighted it in my budget message that people can read online, but I just want to let people know that these are what guides us every day and every year when we put the budget together about how we're going to provide services in the future.
Okay. And then the capital improvement program is another aspect of the budget, and if you might explain how that ties in with the budget process.
The council's already approved the plan itself. They will approve the budget with that. The capital improvement plan is online. Certainly people can take a look at the different projects. It's funded a lot with debt service, as I mentioned. So I would certainly look up online if you've got a specific project you're interested in. You probably can take a look at it. We have a 10-year capital improvement plan online. It's not just the projects for 2023, but we've got a lot of projects planned for 2023. Wisconsin Avenue, some of the areas around there, that's probably the biggest street project that people are going to see next year.
Okay, all right. There's a lot more information there, and I know that Public Works Director James Radig produced a program where he kind of outlines the proposed budget for next year. Okay, we spoke to it a little bit earlier about the fact that the city budget that we're talking about today is part of the overall tax bill. There are other units of government that receive funding out of that tax bill. if we could take a look at that graphic that outlines how that dollar amount is broken down.
The city and our finance department, our city treasurer, our finance director, Russ Van Gompel, we're responsible for mailing out the tax bills. So a lot of people will tend to react to that way. But everything we just discussed in terms of what the impact on your tax bill, the city only receives 40% of the entire tax bill that you receive. The other 60% goes to other governmental entities that are independent of the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Area School District, or in some cases Winneconne, Winnebago County, and Fox Valley Technical College. So while we collect it and take the brunt of the complaints when people are paying their bills, the reality is we only get about 40% of that cut. So I think it's important to point that out because a lot of people don't understand it. Again, I think property taxes could be lower if we receive greater sharing of income and sales tax from the state. But be aware that we're not the only governmental entity that relies on property taxes. And this is just an educational thing, and I think the public appreciates knowing more about this.
Mm-hmm. Well, and speaking of the public knowing more about it, so there is a budget hearing coming up on Wednesday, November 2nd. We mentioned it earlier. And what can people look for at this meeting?
This is a public's opportunity to speak up and give their input, whether they like or don't like something about the budget. It's at a special time, 5 p.m., over here at City Hall at 215 Church. You can also watch it on Oshkosh Media, GovTV, of course. And then after that, public input, the council will give us some preliminary direction in advance of their consideration and final adoption of the budget on November 9th. The council meeting is moved to November 9th because election day is on November 8th.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. And any other final comments about the budget, Mark?
I value the public's input on this. I mean, this is a very big budget. There's a lot of things that are mandated, so we don't have full discretion over some things, but I think you can see where our priorities are and that we're trying to do things that are important for the public with all of our priority goals. So I appreciate the public's trust in us presenting a fiscally responsible budget for them. And now council has to look at it and say, are there any tweaks we're going to make to this? And we have to respect their role in this process because they're the policymakers, they're responsible to the public, and we want the public to know that their input matters.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much for your insights today, Mark.
It's always a pleasure, Andy. Thank you so much.
Okay, and thank you for joining us today. If you would like to review any of those past budget meeting discussions that were televised on Oshkosh Media, you can always visit our Oshkosh Media YouTube channel for Oshkosh Common Council meeting archives and the full library of Oshkosh Media programming. Again, join us for another City Manager's Report prior to the next Common Council meeting. Thanks for joining us today.